I hear a lot of people talking about investing, saying things like, investors seek passive income and use money to make more money. I was talking with a business and economics high school teacher recently, and he said something that really caught my attention. He said he was asset rich, but cash flow poor, and that he should be putting more money into the stock market to get passive income. So what do people really mean when they say they want to invest for passive income? And does it really exist? If an investment is truly passive, is there a trade-off the investor has to make? Whenever I hear people talk about passive income, I've only really heard them talk about two types of assets: property that they then get managed for them, and publicly traded shares. The intent seems to be that they can purchase an asset and forget about it, while still having cash roll in to reward them for that ownership. It is an appealing concept, the idea that you can just forget about anything to do with an asset you own, and money will just keep getting generated and deposited into your bank account. But how many people do you see ever get wealthy using this strategy? Have you ever heard someone quit their job because they don't need to work for money anymore due to the great returns from passive investments coming through? If the share market returns were so good that you could buy and forget, surely banks would lend against shares as collateral. You can use property as bank collateral, but is property really a passive investment? How many people do you know are wealthy with massive wads of cash coming in from passive investment? How many people can travel the world, enjoy luxury possessions and live the life of their dreams without having to carefully manage their portfolio and take ownership of their asset performance? Property is one of the most common investment vehicles that people refer to as a passive investment. But if we look at property, first of all, the term property covers a lot of different types of land or building-based assets. So for the purpose of this discussion, let's look at long-term residential property investment. As a minimum, there is maintenance work on the building. Tenants require monitoring, and communications and financial tracking needs to be done to ensure rent payments are made as per the rental agreement. So while the return on your time invested could be a lot higher than selling your time, because you're selling access to your asset rather than selling your time, it is still not passive. If I pay property managers and maintenance people, I can reduce my time investment further, but you still need to check that they're doing what they're meant to be doing and perform due diligence to make sure you still get the returns you need. So even managed property, I would argue, is not truly passive. Owning publicly traded shares is also often referred to as a passive investment. There are different approaches to purchasing publicly traded shares, with many people seeing these as a shorter term buy-sell gamble. But for the purposes of this discussion, we're going to look at purchasing shares as a genuine interest in buying into long-term returns in the form of dividends or growth of a company. Public shareholders have no control over the management of the asset they're buying into. In fact, all shares are is the purchase of a promissory note that entitles the holder to a share in a company's future performance. But exactly what that looks like is determined by company management, and they can choose to pass company profits to shareholders or reinvest them for growth however they like. So in that regard, yes, you could say they are passive. However, if you don't track, follow, monitor, explore and evaluate the company's performance, you open yourself up to enormous risk. I believe this is because the less control you have over an asset, the greater your risk exposure is. And the greater your risk exposure, the greater responsibility you have to monitor, follow and analyze performance to ensure you get positive returns. Therefore, I personally don't believe shares are passive unless you intend to willingly and irresponsibly expose yourself to high levels of risk. So are there other investment options that are truly passive? Well, banks will give fixed returns on term deposits. However, I don't regard term deposits as an investment because you don't own an asset. That said, there is a time and place for them in an investment strategy. but for the most part, in my lifetime, term deposits have paid returns lower than inflation. So they actually, to me, just serve the purpose of limiting the damaging effect of inflation on your money. Peer-to-peer lending is still operating in some countries, but again, you don't actually own an asset. And other investment vehicles or systems, such as private equity, venture capital, and entrepreneurialism, are often seen as out of reach, and many people have no idea how to enter these industries, how to evaluate opportunities, and none of these are seen as passive investment vehicles. Now, for many investors, it appears old age retirement is the purpose and end goal of their investing. What they're often trying to do is be in the business of selling their time till they hit the age for superannuation in their country, and hopefully have a little pottle of investments that will subsidize their expenses with some extra income. For me, that means the assets they're aspiring to own are so low in performance value, they're not passive. The reality is they're purchasing or building assets that are so grossly underperforming, they have to put enormous amounts of energy into selling their time to subsidize their lack of asset value and returns. To me, an asset portfolio that requires you to continue to sell your time to subsidize poor performance is the very opposite of passive. And owning assets without being able to influence their performance means you are exposed to unnecessary risk. So is there such a thing as passive income? No, I don't believe so. There is, however, an inverse relationship between the price of an asset and its dependence on the skills you bring as the owner that influences the returns. For that reason, assets that require little or nothing from the owner to function generally cost a lot and return very little. And assets that require the owner to bring large amounts of skill and value have the potential to deliver massive returns. All assets require active management, and effectively evaluating assets requires the same understanding of business principles, regardless of whether the asset needs the owner to operate it or not. So investors that bring more than just money to the table should logically generate significantly larger returns than those that don't. This means when a person develops an investment strategy, they need to factor how much value they can bring beyond just money. It also means investing in business and wealth education enables them to make their assets more productive and valuable. So an investment in their own skills directly correlates to the returns they can generate with their assets. With this in mind, the concept of being asset rich and cash flow poor, I think, is really a reflection of a person being inefficient with the resources they have. Because if they understand how to turn value into income, being asset rich should also mean being cash flow rich. Finally, if all assets require active involvement from an investor, at least in some form, a person in a job is far better to focus their energies on developing business skills and learning to apply them in their everyday work activities than just going through the motions. Learning how to deliver value to customers to increase the value and productivity of an asset, even one that you don't own in the short term, will open doors and opportunities and give you applicable skills that you can use to maximize the value of your own assets. I'm Morton-Jones, and I make these videos to advance financial education for people who are frustrated because their income is limited and dependent on selling their time. My mission is to catapult you towards massive wealth through industry and business skills that lead to asset ownership and growing your very own money tree. If you found this video helpful, please hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in my next video.